some female fictional characters who are just part of the culture at this point. And one of them is Bridget Jones, who is back this week in the 4th film. It's called Mad About the Boy. We kind of talked about it when the trailer came out. She's widowed. She's got 2 kids, primary school age kids.
Mr. Darcy died. And that's not a spoiler because it's even in the trailer.
It is. It's in the trailer and it happens very early on. Well, the acknowledgement of it does. It's actually quite sad.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then maybe predictably for 2025, she has a fling with a younger guy who's that hot one from White Lotus. And then, well, other things happen. We won't spoil it for you. Anyway, Bridget Jones, traitorous anti-feminist, hopeless romantic, bumbling bombshell. All these tags are fair calls for the character that British journalist Helen Fielding created in the 90s. Now, at the time, and I remember this very clearly, I read all the books before, well, I read the books that were out before the movie and I loved them. At the time, she was groundbreaking, which is really hard to believe. She was a voice for single women that hadn't really been heard before. I mean, single women of a very particular type, like slightly posh, middle-class, white, works in PR in London. Like, it's a very particular vibe, but all the same.
She was a hot mess.
She was very much a hot mess.
That's what was refreshing because I think female characters predominantly, particularly in rom-coms, had all been very perfect, kind of like Julia Roberts style.
She'd been contrasted to the Sally in When Harry Met Sally in terms of being very neat and ordered. And like we've talked on this show before about the difference between a poodle and a wolf. Like there's kind of these categories of woman where a poodle is a woman who appears to have it all together. Mia,
I'm a poodle.
You're actually a poodle.
That's all you need to know.
It's like interested in clothes and I don't know, maybe you're better at being a woman. And then there's the wolf, which is Holly and I, which is sometimes we've only got one earring on. We've got stains on our clothes. Our hair always needs a brush, that kind of thing. And most of what was in rom-coms was the poodle. And I think Bridget came along and was like, I'm a wolf.
And women loved her because she was honest. She worried about the size of her ass. She worried about how much she was drinking and smoking. She was attracted to the wrong men. She always felt like she was out of step with the poodles, Jessie, the neat, picture-perfect couples and families all around her.
And she was also portrayed as being overweight, which is hilarious when you look back at it and realise where a lot of our body dysmorphia came from as Gen X. Because she was maybe a size 10.
That's true, but in slight defence, in the book, that was really refreshing, right? Like it was in the book, it was really refreshing because it was just real. You know, now, and you'll notice in the new movies, and particularly this new one, there is absolutely no mention of weight, as there shouldn't be. But in a way, we've just airbrushed that conversation out because it is a conversation women have all the time. Anyway, it was an era of exploring chaotic women. Carrie Bradshaw was the much edgier American version of Bridget. And then came a slew of hot mess women who evolved over time, from Bridget to Girls, Hannah Horvath in Girls, to Fleabag, to Issa Rae in Insecure. But now the oldest of the hot messes, Bridget, the grandma of the group, is in the new movie 51. And we're a bit less comfortable, as seen by the mighty Carrie Bradshaw backlash of the And Just Like That era, with properly grown-up women not having their shit together, even though many of us actually don't. Mia, what happens when the hot messes grow up?
I've had to really check myself on this because when I saw the film, and it was so lovely to spend time with those characters, Hugh Grant in particular, you're right, it was emotional to see that glimpse of Mr. Darcy and see Bridget again, and it was lovely, like spending time with old friends. But there was something that grated on me about her incompetence, about that sort of almost performative incompetence. And I don't know, like part of me was like, well, this just doesn't ring true. Like she's a mother, why can't she cook spaghetti? Like it's not cute anymore. She's caught up a tree, whoops. And it just felt, it felt a bit confronting. And then I had to think, well, the women I know, all we do, as Jessie tells us, is talk about how we're forgetful and how we're peri and how we're hormonal and hot flushes and all of those things. And we're owning, we don't give a fuck if people don't think we've got our shit together and we're sick of trying to pretend to be perfect. So I'm really conflicted about it. I don't know. I found it confronting though.
Do you think that it's because for 30 years we've had this Bridget Jones character, but in a culture that is so drowning in the internet, it doesn't look subversive anymore. Yeah. Because the idea of like a young woman being a diarist, like letting us into her life and sharing her day-to-day worries, like welcome to TikTok. That's just what every woman is now, Bridget Jones. And now there's real currency in performing your hot messness, and it's become a trope both in literature and TV, but it's also all over like all the content that we consume. And I have a real... like I get uncomfortable when I see what I think is like people playing up the hot mess thing. I see this with like families all the time. There's certain influencers and you stumble across their videos and it's like the camera's falling over and they're a mess and there's vomit on their clothes. And I know that is what it looks like. But at the same time, I find something maybe slightly irritating about it because I feel like maybe they're profiting off it or maybe that's an image or a brand that they're cultivating. Does that make sense?
It does. But to your point about how it's not subversive anymore, that's really, when you think about it, that's so great because it shouldn't be. Bridget Jones, the books are 30 years old. And if nothing had changed for women in 30 years, we would be, not very happy about that. So I think it's fantastic that what was once groundbreaking is now, it should feel passé and it should feel weird. But when she's now put in a modern setting, should we expect her to have absorbed her, when I talk about her as if she's a real person, but that character, to have absorbed all these cultural changes around her and now not be all those things because it's not cool or because it's not interesting?
I mean, on the other hand, I look at it.
Her character wouldn't have changed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I haven't changed that much in 30 years.
I look at it and go, and I see a lot of criticisms of this and I find them a little bit frustrating because I'm like, try and write a female character in a novel and you kind of need her to be this. Like you need her to be undone, especially now, I suppose.
Because that's her relatability.
It's her relatability, but it's also how things go wrong. Like you can't have a woman who's functioning. A functioning woman a novel does not make.
But to be honest, you can't have a functioning anybody. Because one of the things that's interesting about this is that we're a bit irritated by Bridget's hot messness because we're like, come on, doll, you should have figured out by now how to boil spaghetti. But then Hugh Grant walks in and he hasn't changed either, and nor probably would he have done. He's still like, oh, you naughty little minx and all that kind of stuff. And we're all like, swoon, love it.
So I think that there's this dichotomy between the two ways that women can be portrayed is either completely perfect or a complete disaster. And we see it with influencers, we see it with characters in movies and TV shows. And I sort of feel like I don't want to buy either of those. I don't want to be just the hot mess and I don't want to have to be perfect. Where's the room for the middle?
Yeah, and I feel like this trope, I remember a few years ago watching a show and just going, if I see another woman trip over, I'm going to lose it.
Because women Jennifer Lawrence was the coolest girl in the world and she fell over every time she was in public.
Yes.
Now, was that a deliberate strategy because that played into this trope? Or was she like, I don't belong here. I'm a bit of an interloper. I'm not poised.
Yeah.
I'm not, I'm an outsider. Or is that just what a lot of us are like? We are self-conscious, not very poised, not very perfect.
Yeah, which is interesting to see, I suppose. But at the same time, it's like if you keep falling over, I think you have an inner ear infection and you need to get that sorted out.
Don't you think that to not be attacked, women have to lead with their vulnerability? Like we talk about the number of podcasts hosted by women talking about their failures and the number of books talking about their failures and their fuck-ups, which is a sort of a trope that men don't have. Men are very able to talk about their successes and encouraged to talk about their successes, and men are very reluctant to talk about their failures, whereas women almost lead with that so as not to be disliked by other women, to be more likeable.
And is it expressing a basic truth that we all, even the most poised and organised amongst us women, we never feel like we're living up to the ideal. So we always feel a bit grossed out by ourselves, and I might have a period stain on the back of my skirt, I might smell, I might whatever. Like the insecurities about our femaleness are always there.
I kind of assumed, like I know that your 20s are for being a hot mess. You've got scope and there is something kind of cute about it. I did sort of assume that by your 40s and 50s you don't feel like a hot mess anymore. Am I right or am I wrong?
Well, you feel hot.
I feel like a hot mess who is better at knowing which bits of that matter and which bits of it don't. You know what I mean? Like, I think that if you can't boil spaghetti and you've got a family to feed, like that's probably like something you should sort out. If you keep falling over, the ear infection, probably something you should sort out. Most of us have to have our shit together to the point where we're paying our bills and turning up to work and doing all those things. But if you're a chaotic person, you don't suddenly change when you become a grown-up, in inverted commas.
My theory, you're allowed to be a hot mess until you have kids.
Yeah.
So I think that what we don't like is watching a woman still be chaotic, have her actions impact other people, sort of be driven by the whims of whatever she feels like.
Not cute.
It
feels irresponsible.
It feels irresponsible, and it feels like, well, you're now in charge of the development of another person, and mothers are not allowed to be a hot mess.
100%. And it's interesting because what you talked about before about the influencers who, and you know, Mia, you were one of these people in the groundbreaking early days of Mamamia of going like, it looks like my life looks like this, but actually sometimes I'm eating muesli in the shower or whatever it was that you're doing. But like the people who are doing that now, yes, it's relatable, but they also get a lot of criticism. There are a lot of people who are like, I feel sorry for those poor kids. Look at the state of that house. Is that what you're feeding them for dinner? You know, it's like.
I must say, sometimes I see it and I'm like, I can't. I live in a house that's a mess. Like, I don't need to see your messy house too. I actually find it's not good for my nervous system.
Do you know what I think is very hard from a TV or a character point of view is growing up characters in fiction. Yeah. So we saw with And Just Like That, where those characters, just like Bridget Jones, went from their 30s to their 50s. And we wanted the characters to evolve, but we also wanted them to stay the same. So, for example, Miranda, who was so capable in the OG Sex and the City, and then And Just Like That, she was like this bumbling fool who didn't seem to know what words to use and didn't know what a podcast was and didn't understand racism. And people didn't like that.
Yeah.
People
and
really didn't like that.
With the genre, I suppose, it's like what we want from our literature or our movies is that you have kind of this arc where then they kiss and it's all perfect. Like our movies are kind of like we have a conclusion and things are solved. But with Bridget and with Carrie, another obstacle comes, which is actually how life is. Like
Carrie didn't change and we didn't like that either. So Carrie, we were like, oh, it's not that cute talking about shoes when you're in your 50s and, you know, being so ditzy.
Yes, but it's interesting because in real life we know a million women who blow up their lives when they're 50, you know, who decide to leave a marriage, change their career, who are confused about the way the world is now and what words to use and all those things. So I think that we're comfortable with women's stories ending with the ring on the finger. You know what I mean? And like, that's that then, you know, including Bridget Jones in lots of ways. But women's stories just keep going and going and going. And I don't – it's interesting how we just kind of – we want to look away from the chaos when it's not pretty anymore.
I have a question. Is there such thing as a man hot mess? Because I keep trying to conjure an image in my mind and I can't think of what a male hot mess would look like.
Know, there was that time in the 90s and noughties where we loved a schlubby guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
all the rom-com leads tended to be...
But he's always like very relaxed.
40-year-old version.
Yeah, they're always quite
to be
relaxed.
Like watching video games and like, you know, playing video games and eating shit and not getting it together. And they're
never
always
rushing.
Intimidated by the muscle bros.
Yeah, yeah.
But that was a trope in itself. And then they always managed to somehow get the type A beautiful model girlfriend.
Yeah, true. I guess I just didn't feel like they were comparing themselves to some ideal of masculinity and always letting themselves down in the way that we do with women.
It was one of the challenges that we had, and you were in those writing rooms for Strife with the character of Emeline, because we wanted to show those two things. We wanted to show her being incredibly capable but also being a hot mess. And we wanted to flip it. Sometimes she was a hot mess at work. Sometimes she was a hot mess at home. Sometimes she was really capable at home. Sometimes she was capable, like, because I do think that that's true. And it does, I guess, in fiction and TV and stuff and movies, it can be hard and you need shortcuts. But I agree. I hate that trope of what used to watch a show called The Newsroom, Aaron Sorkin, and I had to stop because the female lead in that, she literally would walk from one side of the newsroom to the other and she'd fall over.
Yeah.
And it was like that was this shortcut for her being, I don't know, relatable or having vulnerabilities or being human.
There's a really excellent discussion in the latest season of The Diplomat. You know, the whole character shortcut for Kerry Russell's character in that is that she doesn't brush her hair and she doesn't care about clothes. So she always looks kind of amazing, but she's always wearing a very boring suit. She has messy hair.
And her eyeliner's a bit smudged.
Yeah, and in this particular scene, her pant button had broken, so she had a safety pin. And then she meets the vice president of the US, who's played by Alison Janney, and basically Alison Janney tells her this is not cute anymore. Like, you think this is cute, but she said, if you can't figure out a way to do up your pants, how are people supposed to trust you with the nuclear codes? And you're like,